dear children, and welcome. This is our first video on spectrum, literature and contemporary issues. I shall be dealing with this part, and especially the module from module 3, no men are foreign onwards. Okay, the module 3 and 4, the whole thing shall be dealt by me, and Clement sir shall be handling module 1, module 2 and the first and the second chapter of module 3. That is up to Love Across the Salt Desert by K.K. Daruwala. Okay, so from No Men Are Foreign, from that onwards I shall be handling. So before we start this poem, No Men Are Foreign, we shall have to have a brief understanding about this age, because it is the contemporary issues, the period of world wars, the period of various or the 20th and the 21st, or it is mostly dealing with the 20th and the 21st century issues. So, now No Men Are Foreign is a poem. It's an anti-war poem which is set in the backdrop of both the wars, the First World War and the Second World War. So before we move on to the poem, let's have a quick understanding of the literary period of this age. Now this literary period of the late 19th and 20th century is referred to as the modern period, the early modern period, the high modern period. It's to do with the modernist period in literature. So this is the period King George VI. King George VI of England. Who is King George VI? King George VI is the father of our present Queen Elizabeth. Okay, the present monarch of England, Queen Elizabeth II. Yes, her father, King George VI. So in literature, it marks the beginning of the modernist and also the end of the modernist period when it comes to the Second World War. So you have the modernist period that falls between two destructive wars, that is the First World War and the Second World War. Now in most of the literature presented in this period, they reveal the chaotic experiences of the war, and they are these chaotic experiences, these terrible experiences. See, many people were homeless. It was a period of disaster, a period of destruction, a period of terrible anxiety. അതായത് വേൾഡ് വാറിൻ്റെ രണ്ട് വേൾഡ് വാർസിൻ്റെയും പീരീഡ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ ഈ ലോകം കണ്ടതിൽ ഏറ്റവും ഡിസ്ട്രക്റ്റീവ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു പീരീഡായിരുന്നു. എവ്രി ഫാമിലി ഓഫ് ദി ഹോൾ വേൾഡ് വാസ് എഫക്റ്റഡ്, എവ്രി വൺ. Okay, so we'll come to it slowly, but before that, this was also the time of Great Depression. You have studied Great Depression in Europe and America, which led to disillusionment, disorientation, unemployment, poverty. Okay, it was also the time of fascist ideologies. You have studied that in history, world history. Italy and fascism in Italy and Nazism in Germany under Hitler. And how the Holocaust. Do you remember the chapters that you studied on Holocaust? What is Holocaust? Jews were killed because they were considered impure. They were killed in concentration camps, and Hitler never used the word killing. There were a lot of justification to which he gave, or why the Jews should be hated. He used the words like selection. he used the word euthanasia. We studied euthanasia, no, in Robert Frost. So euthanasia means mercy killing for the disabled people. So he says that he's doing good to the humanity. So killing, the word killing was not used, but how many people were brutally killed. In Facebook, I recently saw one victim of the Holocaust, and she was relating her experience. She was a twin. Okay, twin sisters. So they were used for experiments. There is a doctor, I forgot the name. He's referred to as the angel of death. He's a very famous person. We have studied that in history, but I forgot the name suddenly. So he is referred to as the angel of death, and he conducts experiments on the human body, just like we conduct, or the doctors, they conduct experiments on animals for finding out various. So he conducts experiments on the human body in small children, and how she relates her terrible experiences of those experiments, where she was crippled, she had to crawl as a baby, and she saw how her parents were taken away from her, and they were put in the concentration camp. And what is concentration camp? You're dead. The gas chambers. And the pictures also shows these in history text. If you look at those concentration camps, the pictures show them as a very calm place, but this is just a mask to hide what is happening, the hideous, heinous crimes that were done inside that chamber. Many films were promoted, where the propaganda movies, they're called the propaganda movies, to make others hate the Jews. So it was all about hatred, and then the world wars. So the whole world was fragmented. Okay, so it was the period. It was also the period of Spanish Civil War, not period of Spanish Civil War, and the society seemed to be breaking down in many ways. There were a lot of these established ideas of family, religion, morality, all were being questioned now. All these had stirs. They started in the earlier period also, the Victorian period. It's called the Victorian dilemma, but in this period it became more intensified. Okay, and it began to be expressed in various works of literature. The experiences of these wars, the people who experienced these wars, those soldiers who were in the forefront of the fighting the war, it heightened and intensified their experiences, heightened and intensified this turmoil. This was also a period in literature. When you come back to literature and the various movements in literature, this was the period of Sigmund Freud. Now, why am I mentioning Sigmund Freud? Now, Sigmund Freud, through his psychoanalysis, proved that the human mind is actually the reason for our own reality. We construct our reality. Okay, the human mind constructs our reality, and it is not a stable entity. What people proved earlier as a stable mind, Sigmund Freud proved through his psychoanalysis that it is not a stable thing. It is not. A mind is a very powerful, actually mind is a very powerful thing to which we don't know much about. Even now, the scientists are not able to prove how powerful our mind is. Okay, our mind is in fact an enigma, a mystery, where that its power we don't know its power. Okay, even science has not been able to prove its power fully. Okay, now it is this mind is itself in a state, always in a state of turmoil and changes, and there is a lot of fragmentation in our mind itself. our thoughts are sometimes fragmented. Sometimes our mind is in unrest when we face tensions and anxieties. It is actually the mind is in an unrest state. Okay, and all these, when Freud brought out all these things, that mind is in a chaotic state, fragmented state, unrest state, the writers also used this as a foundation in their modern literature. Okay, they tried to add this fragmentation and chaos and anarchy in many ways, in many poems and novels and plays of literature. So they also employed mythical method. Now, what is myth? Using the myth and legends, they used it in a different way, not the kind of legends and myths that we had in the earlier time, but they used it in a modern way, in a different way. That was very much to do with the modern man and how he sees the world through myth. So like you have this, the T.S. Eliot in his review on James Joyce. You will be studying about James Joyce later, but not in your undergraduate course of work, but you may have come across James Joyce and his works when you study, when obviously you will be studying a lot of movements in literature, so you will come across James Joyce and his very famous work Ulysses. Now there is this contemporary world in which is in the form of anarchy. Okay, and to give a shape and significance to this immense panorama of futility and anarchy or the contemporary period or the history, the modernist writers, they use this mythical method. They employ various myths of Ulysses to portray it and to show how it works in the modern man. Okay, it's not myth as such of myth as in directly taking the myth of Ulysses and presenting Ulysses before you. It takes the myth of Ulysses and presents it through the modern man. It would be speaking about a modern man like our Mahabali, for instance. If we are to take the myth of Mahabali and present a story, a film, presenting Mahabali and his historical Mahabali will be a myth only. But presenting it in a mythical world, a mythical way in which the modernist writers are talking about will be a Mahabali wearing jeans and t-shirt, or Mahabali as in the form of perhaps Dulquer Salman, or in the form of Mammootty or Mohanlal. Okay, and riding a bike and so on, and it is going to be or the issues, we will have the Vamana in as a villain perhaps. Okay, and it will start to question, actually the movie itself will start to make us think about the various myths, and through these they will make you think about the contemporary issues that we face today in our life. So it was a different way of writing. Okay, now you will also find a lot of revival of the classics in the spirit, and you have modernist poems which are fragmented, like the fragmented world wars or the fragmented world after the world wars. You have Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, the controversial as well as the most famous work of T.S. Eliot is the Wasteland. The Wasteland is actually a fragmented poem which portrays before you the terrible world that we are living in. And also you have various techniques like the stream of consciousness techniques, where the inner psyche of the character is portrayed. The inner mind, his dilemma, his anxiety, his suicidal feelings, his guilt, every moment, every problems, conflicts that the protagonist goes through, the fragmented mind that he has, everything is portrayed through the stream of consciousness technique. Okay, so now let's start to talk about the post-war period. I'm not going to begin the poem today because you have to understand the age first, and then only you will be able to understand the poem. So let's talk about the post-war period also. So bearing this modernism that we discussed earlier, the post-war is a reference to the world after the two destructive wars, the World War I and World War II. It was a very, very disillusioning period in a way. Writers and thinkers came face to face with the extent of evil that humanity is capable of. How man can turn to be a destructive monster. It was the age of turmoil, as we discussed earlier. It was where established ideas of nation and truth and honesty were all questioned. What is nationality, by the way? We speak about ourselves as Indian. We speak about ourselves as Pakistanis, Arabs, Europeans, British, Americans. What is this nationality? Nationality is something that emerged only after the 19th century. You should remember that as well. This nationalist pride, or this feeling of nationality, feeling of oneness, feeling of making one country, the feeling of country as such that we have today, came or emerged only in the late 19th century. Till then they were just fragmented, or kingdoms, various kingdoms. And only after this 19th century did we have this so-called, countries and boundaries. So people fighting, we cannot withstand the Pakistanis, no? We can't see them face to face, let alone the Pakistanis. Can we even, when we have our migrant workers in our Kerala right now, how do we look upon these Bengalis and Tamilians? We scorn at them. Isn't it? We see them as a foreigner. We don't see that, or we don't try to think about him as a human being, as our brother or our sister. We are all one race. We are all human species. The animals don't have such kind of bound or separation, whereas we see them as Tamilians, we see them as Karnatakas, or we see them as people from Delhi or Mumbai. And they also, the Mumbai people, the North Indians cannot withstand the South Indians. Especially they cannot withstand us Malayalis. They call us Mallus, right? So it's all to do with this feeling of, seeing the other as a foreigner. Alright, so that is exactly what the poem is all about. The poet is actually questioning this very idea of being a foreigner. Who is a foreigner? What is a nation? What is nationality? Don't you think all these things, India, as what we have, India, don't you think it's actually a construct? It's actually a construct. Now, only after the Indian independence was Pakistan born, and you have Bangladesh. All was once upon a time a part and parcel of the very India, right? And leave India. India was a part of Asia, right? So only after these independence, and only after this fight and growing nationality, that we started to find ourselves, to think about ourselves as different from others. I would also like to remind you of the poem Mending Wall by Robert Frost. Good fences make good neighbors. Here even the poet is confused. Do we need a wall? Is it really needed? Is it really essential? When the neighbor says, good fences make good neighbors, yes, to an extent it is good. We are able to respect one another's individuality, one another's, we see one another in a more delightful, or we see one another as friends because of this barrier. But there are times when this becomes very negative. We become so possessive of our belonging that we look upon others as our enemies, trying to encroach upon our land. Like Frost says, I don't have pines, my pine trees will not walk into his garden. That's what he says. Or my pine trees will not walk into his orchard. Right? So he says, why should he worry too much about not having, or why should he worry about the walls breaking down? Let the walls break down. So the mending wall, the poem is mostly about universal brotherhood. Likewise, No Men Are Foreign is also about universal brotherhood, to see one another in the light of, or to see one another as human beings and not as, or treat one another as foreigners or as enemies. So you have another thing that I want you to think about is the Holocaust, right? The Holocaust that shocked humanity, the theme of isolation, the theme of alienation, which was predominant in almost all literature and art. So you have such type of novels. You can see such type of novels in Salman Rushdie, in V.S. Naipaul and all. Now, I'm not going into that, but I would really want you to do a small assignment. Again, this is your internal assignment for your internal exam for the next semester. I want you to do an assignment not on the world wars. I want you to do an assignment on narcissism and fascism. Hitler's reasons for killing the Jews. I'll just give you a small base on Hitler. His reasons for killing the Jews were because he felt that they were impure and they should be wiped out from the society. It was his hatred that he tried to influence, or he tried to put upon the other's mind. He sowed the seeds of his hatred to others, and he used words, as I told you, euthanasia, solutions, mercy, euthanasia is mercy killing. All these Nazi ideas, these ideas were spread through visual images, films, radio, posters, leaflets, and propaganda films were also made to create hatred for the Jews. Why? What was the reason as to why Hitler became this kind of a maniac? There is a reason, and the reason lies in the First World War, and that's what I want you to find out, because you will have to go back to the reasons. You can also take the 9th standard textbook, CBSE or NCERT textbook. You will get the reason for, you will find the reason for Hitler's bitter anger towards the Jews and also to some of the Germans. Okay, and this was the reason as to why narcissism grew, and Hitler's psychic disorder led to the massacres or led to the killing of the Jews, the most horrific crime that the world ever witnessed, the Holocaust. I want you to look or check those pictures also, the concentration camps, the gas chambers, and I also want you to watch some of these interviews on victims of Holocaust, and I want you to listen to what they have to say, because only then will you be able to appreciate this poem, No Men Are Foreign, because this poem is written in the backdrop of these two destructive wars. In your textbook, turn to page 57, No Men Are Foreign. Let's start with James Falconer Kirkup. Now, James Falconer Kirkup was an English poet, a translator and a travel writer. He wrote over 30 books, including autobiographies, novels and plays. He wrote under several pen names. That's the most interesting fact about James Kirkup. He wrote under several pen names, including James Falconer, Ewan Honda, Andrew James, Felix Liston, Edward Rayburn, and so many names, pen names. Okay, so he wrote under several pen names, and he was born on 23rd of April 1918 and he died 10th May 2009. He was an odd boy. He was he was not an ordinary child. He was very odd in his school days. He also demonstrated his protest against the Second World War and spent his time working as an agricultural laborer during those times. So we have to connect this poem with the First World War and the Second World War. The First World War, because the reason for the rise of the fascist ideologies were the ones that later gave rise to the Second World War. Okay, so the First World War, you have to look at why Germany was defeated. What was the reason for Germany's defeat, and how the whole of Europe was drained of their resources. And thus, this defeat of Germany led to the rise of narcissism, and this rise of narcissism led to several heinous crimes, which in fact in the beginning came as like the French Revolution. It was like something of uplifting Germany, but then soon it turned out to be the worst nightmare ever, which finally or slowly was leading to the most destructive war ever, the Second World War. So I want you to base your assignment on both the First World War and the Second World War. This is not just to simply write down anything and send it to me. I want you to understand the experiences that people faced during this time. I don't want you to do a history lesson, because you're not doing a history lesson here. You're not writing me a history lecture. What you're doing is you're going to go check the causes of the war, the effect of the war, mostly the effect of the war. And I want you, that's why I told you, I want you to listen to the various interviews of these Holocaust victims, the ones who are alive today. I want you to listen to them, and from them you will understand these horrors, or the horror, the nightmarish horror of the Second World War. So he openly demonstrated his protest against the Second World War, and he worked as an agricultural laborer during those days. Now that's very important, because as a farmer or agricultural laborer, working as an agricultural laborer, you will find many words from agriculture used in this poem. Okay, and he also worked as a school teacher. He moved to Japan. He worked in various universities for 30 years, and he died in May 2009. Now here his famous works. He was very much influenced by Dylan Thomas, and who was and also this were the other surrealists. Now we'll be speaking about who the surrealism, what is surrealism and all. You will be studying that as well in this semester. His notable and significant writings include the Correct Passion and other poems, the Submerged Villages and other poems, the Descent into the Cave and other poems, No Men Are Foreign, which was written in 1966, the Body Servant poems of exile, He Dreamed He Was a Butterfly, that was written in 1997, The Lonely Scarecrow, and many more. Steve Smith describes him as a poet in the English tradition, original without being freakish, contemporary without being fraudulent. All right, so that's with James Kirkup. We shall start the poem in the next video. So your assignment is to have an understanding of the First World War, the reason for Germany's defeat, the rise of narcissism, the Holocaust, and the Second World War that followed, and how it led to, or what were the effects on each family, the soldiers, the injured soldiers, the people being homeless, poverty, the whole European continent drained of its resources, unemployment. There were even reports of cannibalism. What is cannibalism? Man eating man because of no food, lack of food. So there were even reports of such horrible things. So I want you to just Google, search and understand and see the horrors of war, to understand the horrors of war, because once you understand that, you will be able to appreciate the poem better. So thank you and keep safe.